Yes, we're live. Hurrah. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this LinkedIn Live today. I'm really happy to see you. My name is Julia Poger, and I'm a business conference and diplomatic interpreter. And I work from Russian and French into English and from English into Russian. And as you probably already know by now, I also run a business called Know Your Worth, where I help interpreters and really any service professional to understand how to get your name out there, how to sell your services so you can get work at your fees and under your conditions. And I'd love to see where you're watching us from, whether you're direct or later on replay. I always love to know where people are coming from since interpreters are all over the world. So please write in the comments where you're listening in from today. And before we move into our topic today, I'd like to ask you to stick around to the end so that I can let you know what we'll be talking about in April. So, to our show. Consultant interpreters play a huge role in the interpreting environment, but more people know about agencies. And in fact, the clients who don't know about agencies might just contact the local embassy of the country that speaks your language, as has happened to me a couple of times. So today, my special guest is Peter Sand, who is a consultant interpreter. He lives and works in Geneva and has worked for international trade unions and sports federations that are based in Geneva as well. We actually just met at a wedding a month or so ago, but I've known of him forever because he's the interpreter who designed Interplex, a glossary program that I personally will not buy a computer unless it will house that particular program. It's the best thing I've ever found. And Peter also likes to help new colleagues and those who are just starting out in the profession. So let's get to our questions and welcome, Peter.
Hi, Julia, and thank you very much for inviting me to participate in this program with you.
Well, it's a lot of fun to do that, and I have found, especially at the wedding, that it's a lot of fun to talk to you. So I'm thinking that this 30-minute live might end up going a little longer. So tell us what consultant interpreters actually do, because I'm not even sure I know.
Okay, consultant interpreters, of course, are the go-between. And it's sometimes a tricky role to play because you're trying to understand the needs of the customer. You know the needs of the interpreters because you're part of that group. And it's a tricky balancing act, I would say, trying to find a halfway point so that you can accept conditions or find the right conditions that your colleagues will enjoy working with. So a consultant interpreter basically is the person who's actually going to go and do the work that's going to bring in work for the interpreters. He's going to go looking for possible clients, try and persuade them of the services that we can provide. And I think that where you spoke about an agency and what the difference between a consultant interpreter and an agency, I mean, all of us, I think, in this profession know that although agencies have a role to play most of the time, they just want to get a customer, irrespective of how they're going to do that. And it's often at the cost of the interpreter. We know that remuneration often, for example, and that's just one of the aspects, but remuneration from agencies in certain countries is extremely low. Plus, of course, agencies take fees, as we know. And in many cases, I've heard from colleagues that they're getting actually very little money at the end of the day for what they're doing, even though without their work, the agencies wouldn't survive at all. So yes, you wanted.
Well, the question I would have then is, with an agency, for example, they put up a wall between me and the client. And so if I have any questions, okay, granted, let's pretend I'm the head of the team, because so I would have the authorization to talk to the client. The agency would not allow me to do that. So all of the interpreters might talk to me, and then I would have to turn to the agency, which wouldn't understand, why I'm asking certain things. How would consultant interpreters handle that?
I think that there is no one size fits all. There are certain consultant interpreters who want to keep their cards very close to their chest and sort of very cagey about actually letting their colleagues. I'm the opposite of that. I think that if you don't have confidence in yourself, why should anybody else have confidence in you? So I trust people. And if somebody says, can I contact the client directly? This happens to me quite often. For example, I work a lot with Japanese. it would make absolutely no sense for me to stand in the way of my Japanese colleagues who want to try and get documents, hear who's going to be coming, get background information, to go through me, to try and get somebody to translate. So I always say to my colleagues, please go ahead, just keep me informed as to what information you've got, because it may be relevant for the rest of the team. So to answer your question, the war exists. I think that nearly all agencies put it up. I've seen also many colleagues say, please do not contact, or not even please, do not contact. And I do the opposite. I think that if you're confident that you're doing a good job and that you've got the customer on your side, then you should allow that to happen.
Fantastic. That makes perfect sense, actually. And so let's move on to the next question, which is, how would clients and other interpreters, for example, find consultant interpreters?
Good point. Well, how do we get? I suppose, this is a profession really that's built on word of mouth. And we all know that being in a directory, being in a book can be useful, of course, but there is nothing better than a recommendation. Now, I taught for 20 years at the Geneva School, which was a really wonderful experience for me. I mean, I probably learned as much as I taught.
Yeah.
And it showed me that you've got to, in this profession, it's very difficult to get a foot on the ladder, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I think that people who are working with young people, you teach at Cambridge, as I said, I taught for many years here in Geneva. I think that we're already attuned to the fact that there are people coming out into the market and they need a helping hand. And I've always believed in the principle of what comes around goes around, or the other way around. We were helped. I was helped enormously by my teachers at ETI when I started, enormously. And the only way I can thank them, because they're no longer here or they don't need my help, is to show that I've understood the message and I do the same. So, I mean, either you have direct contact with people because you're teaching yourself, or you're in contact with people who are able to give you names, who'll be able to put you on a path. I mean, we've mentioned Lourdes in our conversations together in Brussels. Now, she teaches, she works a lot with young people, so she'll often contact me and say, I've got somebody I would really recommend to you because this person has such and such a language, or this person has a particular background that you will like. So I think that, I mean, there are several ways of going around this question that you're asking. I don't know which angle to attack it from, but clearly, if you've been to a school and you've had good contacts with the people who've been your teachers, that's a very good way of getting into the profession. A second way, of course, is to find out what are the subjects that you're interested in and see what consultant interpreters are actually managing that. And it's not so difficult to find out. I mean, if you say, I'm interested in sports, there are enormous number of sports organizations. So people will write to me because they know that there are certain sports that I cover. And some of my colleagues do exactly the same. I'd say that recommendations, though, is the best thing. If you really need to get a helping hand, a recommendation is the best way of contacting a consultant interpreter. After all, I'm sure it happens to you as well, Julia. I get inundated in emails, right?
Yeah.
And there comes a point, I don't want to call it compassion fatigue, but there is a certain element of that creeps in where you think, listen, how many people can I continue helping, or what market hole am I going to be able to develop?
Yeah.
So it's contacting people. We've all done that. I think when we started out, we started sending letters to as many people as we could, and we kept on praying that it won't be, we regret to inform you, is going to come back. But there is a bit of that because we just get too many. I mean, if you look at the number of people coming out of schools every year, it's a very large number.
That's true.
And so a recommendation, I think, is worth to me much more than anything else.
I have to admit, when I first moved here, I had no idea. So that was a little over 20 years ago. I had no idea what consultant interpreters were, who they were, how they worked. And Chris was kind enough to say, why don't I set up a meeting with you and a consultant interpreter who is part of a local consortium here in Belgium, Willy Visser, actually.
Yeah.
And so I contacted her and said, Chris thought you might be willing to have a meeting. Can we have lunch? I'd like to invite you to lunch, but you choose because I don't know Brussels at all. And so we had a nice lunch, and I asked her not whom to market to, but how to market in Europe, because that's a whole, so different from the United States. It's not even funny. And after that, I ended up getting a couple of jobs from CII right away, just because she had met me and she felt that, I guess, that I was somebody to be trusted and somebody who would be able to do what I say I can do, since I've had the experience in the United States as well. So very often it really has been just word of mouth and meeting people and so on.
And just to take up the point that you made, that you actually went to see Willy.
Yes,
And,
I did.
that makes an enormous change. I can't tell you the number of times I've sort of been contacted by people, and I said, perhaps out of laziness, or I just had too long a list, or I didn't get round to it. And then that person would contact me again and say, listen, I happen to be in Geneva. I'm coming for the Labour conference, whatever. Can I come round? Can we meet? And that often unlocked a door. I suddenly thought, this person would be actually a very good fit for me. I'm very, you mentioned, perhaps we'll come back to that. I really enjoy helping young people get out onto the market. And when you see these sort of young people who are enthusiastic, really want to get their heads around new subjects, want to develop in particular ways, and you see that enthusiasm, and you obviously there is always a gut feeling as well. Will that person fit in, etc. But I think it often makes the deal come alive in a way.
Okay, that sounds actually really interesting. It's either that or the other thing I could recommend is, oh, hey, go to any wedding that any other interpreter is having, because you never know who their contacts will be.
Yeah, well, did we know that we were going to meet at this wedding? And
we had no idea.
we
then
had
we
a
ended up
whale of a
being
time.
seated next to each other too, which is pretty impressive.
Yeah.
Okay, so I know that this is another bugbear that people ask, and just to explain one thing, when I very first worked here for a consortium or for a consultant interpreter, like 6 months later, because I worked, in June or whenever, 6 months later, I got a bill for, X amount of money per day that I worked for them for the year. And nobody had told me about it ahead of time. And I have to say that at that time, having come just from the States, that was seen as a kickback. And that's illegal in the US. I mean, telling me ahead of time and saying, we take 10% or we take 10 euros or we take whatever is one thing, but just asking after the fact, we want this thing, shocked me no end. I mean, now I understand it. Now it's not a problem because, of course, I have no problem financing the people who are getting me work. But at the same time, I know that some people do and some people don't. So what's your take on it?
My take on it is that each market is different. I know that in many cases, colleagues who do a lot of the footwork, they go out, find work, distribute it to colleagues, and that should be remunerated in some way or another. And in some cases and in some markets, those colleagues will then charge. But I think you're quite right in saying that that should always be upfront. That is, you don't want to have people telling you after the fact, once the meeting is over, by the way, you owe me 30 francs or 40 francs. In my market, I'm very glad that it's not happened to me at all like that. I don't quite like the model personally. I think that we are working for the customer. And I believe that it is the customer who should be financing those activities and the time I spend looking to put a team together. So I charge my clients a fee. That's becoming more and more difficult because, and we'll probably be talking about RSI or more and more Zoom conferences. Now, of course, access is to everybody. Everybody can have access, and we don't all have the same cost of living expenses. Switzerland's got very high cost of living. If you're living in Argentina, it's probably going to be half of that. So it is sometimes quite difficult. There was a sort of message I suddenly saw about the competition that comes up between us. That there is an element of that. As long as you've got the trust of your customer, in my case, I always explain what that fee covers. why I'm doing that, how much time I'm spending on it. And, sometimes if you explain to the customer, you say, if you go to your garage mechanic for your car, you don't bat an eyelid when they say we're going to charge you 100 francs an hour for labor. But I said, in many cases, customers think that should just be part of it. I think there could be a case made that if you are yourself on the team, that you could waive that fee. I don't do that, but who knows? But if I was suddenly in a competitive situation where it would make or break, and at the present time, I'm trying to get a customer back that I lost, and the first thing that they said was, "What about an organizing fee?" And you say, "Well, I'd be prepared to waive it for, I don't know, X number of meetings," but it is extremely complicated, so I cannot give you a single answer to that question. But I really believe that it should be. As long as I can, I'd like to be able to charge my customer for it and not my colleagues.
I could go with that. On the organizing fee thing, just as a small tidbit from Know Your Worth, this is something that I've recommended in the past to other people who also organize, is tell the customer, for example, that you get 3 free hours of organizing with the fee that I've given you, but afterwards it's an hourly fee. And if you don't have any changes, the 3 hours should take it. But if you have a lot of changes, if you make a lot of changes, if you cause me a lot of problems, then it will cost you more money because I'll be charging an hourly fee. You wouldn't have to document it.
But I also find now, because of the fact that we charge cancellation fees, that customers are often asking me to put teams together quite often at the very last moment. I'll get a request on Friday for Monday.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. And that means that my weekend is going to be spent phoning around, trying to contact people. There are some people, God bless them, why not, who switch their phones off on the weekend. So there I am trying to put a team together and I'm getting no answers back. And sometimes they're complicated languages. So I've often spent weekends, a whole weekend, just trying to put a team together. And I have large teams to put together in different time zones.
Yes.
And then I noticed also people, even the ones who have their phones on, sometimes think it's not necessary really to answer straight away. So I think that there is a reason for that fee to be charged. Whether we're going to be able to continue charging it in the future is another matter. I'll continue fighting for it. But I don't know, if push came to shove and if I saw that I was going to sort of lose a big meeting and it really depended on organizing fee, yes or no, whether I would not say, I think it would be silly to fight on that principle if the loss is going to be greater than that.
I could see that. On the other hand, I could also see charging a fee. For example, if you're hiring me on Monday to get a team on Friday for Monday, then there's an organizing fee, definitely. But if you're asking me Monday for a team a week later on Monday, then maybe the organizing fee would be less, or it wouldn't, or it could be waived or something to encourage them to go farther out.
I also find, if they're exotic languages, there is even more of a reason to charge a fee, because finding good people for us who live in Europe, finding good people who can work into Bangla, who can work into Mongolian, I can assure you, is not an easy task. And I've spent so much time trying to look into backgrounds, see where they got their training. How come? I mean, my Mongolian is pretty limited. I think you probably would do better there. But how am I going to tell whether the Mongolian that I found who says that they are excellent interpreters are good? So it has involved a lot of I'd say a lot of analytical work. I mean, I'm talking about Mongolian, but quite precisely because I knew that the EU some time ago had organized a summit with Mongolia. Fortunately, I know that in Brussels, when they have high-level meetings, they tend to bring in potential interpreters whom they train in Brussels. And so I went onto the EU website and I looked for when that Mongolian delegation came. Then I found pictures of Mongolian interpreters on the EU website. Then I went back to LinkedIn and then I contacted the ones and I said, "You did this training course in Brussels." It takes a lot of time to do all that.
Investigation
It's
and
a lot of investigation.
you're Sherlock
Mm,
Holmes.
it-
So
Also
one
knowing the people you can ask.
That's true.
Mm,
One person, though I'm not sure if he organizes the way you organize, says he doesn't bother taking a cut for finding something for a colleague, even if it is time consuming, because the colleague will then give work in return. Now, in the
mm,
private market, that certainly works out well among people, who aren't organizing big meetings the way you are.
mm,
But I'm not sure. And just to go back to that one that I pulled up earlier, somebody had mentioned that co-opetition is the way to go as opposed to competition. So I just wanted to
mm.
show you. So here's where we're
Operation with yes.
exactly. And
Yeah.
there was a big TERP summit thing on that in
Yeah.
January. So people are talking about that. We actually have a question from somebody online. So Zilin, hi Zilin, and now I know how to pronounce your name. This is great. I bet that's why you're asking the question. So as a chief interpreter, what are the top do's and don'ts you wish freelancers knew that are not so obvious?
Hmm. I would just fall into the trap of saying they're all obvious because clearly you want people who are good. How are you going to find out that they're good when you do your research? So that is probably not something that the interpreter who's looking for work is going to be able to influence very much. You just have to hope that they're good enough that people want to be able to recommend them. So clearly, I do not want to be called constantly. Nobody likes that. If somebody keeps on sending me an email every other day or every week saying you haven't answered my email, etc., that is definitely a don't for me, because sometimes we're in a busy period and I always answer emails, but not necessarily immediately if they're not absolutely urgent. So I think that you have to sort of tread warily. But clearly, I would say that if the do's would definitely be find somebody who give you a good recommendation. Somebody that, if somebody says Julia would really recommend me and you can contact her and get information from her about me, then that would be definitely a do. That would be something that would make my life easier in any case.
Mhm.
So
And
I know I keep on
as
talking about
Agnieszka says,
recommendation.
you also risk your own reputation if you recommend a poor professional. So
Yeah,
you keep
yeah.
that in mind.
I'm fortunate in many cases because on the trade unions, it's not going to trigger the Third World War.
No.
It's not unlike you who are in the hot seat every time a Russian speaker opens their mouth. Yeah, we're not in a hot seat.
No.
We're not in a hot seat, which is very nice because it's a nice area where young people cut their teeth without risking an enormous amount. But
Mhm.
the points that we've just seen, that your reputation, my reputation is on the line every time I put a team together. So I have
Yeah.
to really think carefully about who I'm putting in with whom. Are they going to do a good job? Are they going to do me proud? Are they going to do themselves proud? And will they fit in? Because I don't know, we haven't spoken about that yet, but for me, that is probably one of the most important things. Quality is something I take for granted, because without that, if there's no quality, what are we selling? We're selling quality. And there are down market people who sell run-of-the-mill stuff. And if the customer is happy with that, then you're never going to be able to persuade them to go away or to pay more for top quality. But we are selling quality. And I think that once you've understood that that's the basic principle, then the second principle for me will be having really good team spirit. When people really enjoy working together, who try and make your life as easy as possible, who make you feel that they're enjoying working in that environment with other people that they can learn from. I was talking about helping young people. I always put a young person or somebody with less experience with somebody with more experience. And I find that really works quite well because they can then turn to that more senior colleague, get advice, get help, get support, and also admit what are the problems. And I find that that's also quite good, is that when you can say, listen, I'm not quite up to where I want to be yet, but I think I can get there provided I get the support. And I'm prepared to put in that extra effort and to provide the people who are going to give that support. Or if they're in the English booth with me or working with me, I would do that as well.
hmm And in fact, Roxanne, who's mentioning our last topic about whether or not you charge fees, says that she found herself in the same position I was in and wasn't sure what the protocol was, but she asked one of her senior colleagues for advice, which is exactly what you're talking about
Mm.
here as well. So I think that's a great way of moving forward. Um, so let's move to if RSI has changed the landscape for you as a consultant interpreter.
I think it's the $64,000 question. Has it? Of course it has. It has changed.
How?
It has changed everything radically. Radically. I mean, for me, it's been exponential. We were having a private conversation the other day, Julia. So
Mhm.
you know my take on this.
Yes.
It's multiplied my market by 10. I think that last year we did over 2,000 interpreter days. That's a lot for one.
Mhm.
I mean, I do this with my wife. It is an enormous amount. So what has RSI done? For the customer, it has democratized participation. You mentioned at the beginning that I work a lot for the international trade union movement.
Mhm.
Now, there are trade unions dotted all over the world. In the past, when the meetings used to be held primarily in Geneva, people would come only if their unions had the money to be able to send them there, or if they were perhaps given a subsidy by the union. But there would be, perhaps a few Latin Americans who would come. There would be perhaps one Indian who would come. Virtually nobody from Oceania. It was just too far and too expensive.
Mhm.
Now RSI makes everything affordable. So everybody can participate. I have meetings now where we don't have one or two Brazilians. We'll have 30, 40, 50. We'll have the same number of Argentinians. There is no limit to the number of people who can attend the meeting. We have meetings where there are 600 participants, whereas before we would have had under 100. So I think the democratization process has been absolutely fantastic. I'm not going to go into what it means for us interpreters, because we all
Yeah.
know, I mean,
We all know what that is.
we all know that there are some people who love RSI. We know that there are some people who hate it. Some people who just pray to God that it's going to go away and that they're going to go back to where it was before.
Mhm.
I always say to people who tell me that, I say, think of the Industrial Revolution. We heard all about we learned about it when we were at school. First
Mhm.
Industrial Revolution actually took place with mechanical looms. And all the weavers suddenly thought we're going to lose our jobs. And some of them decided that because it was such a horrendous idea that they were going to go and just smash the machines up. But that didn't really work out. But there
Yeah.
are other more intelligent people who realize this is going to change us. So how are we going to adapt so that our skills are still going to be in demand? And I think that I would say the same thing for RSI. If we want to be part of this market, we have to adapt, which does not mean to say that that in-person meetings will disappear. Here in Geneva, when they disappeared almost entirely during COVID, they've come back very, very strongly.
Mhm.
But in my market, I've noticed that the tendency is actually towards hybrid meetings, where either you've got some participants in person, some online,
Mhm.
interpreters who could be online or in person. There are various variables that can work.
Mhm.
But more and more, what I'm seeing is that the meetings are actually with the participants on site and the interpreters are all remote. Now, of course, we all know we're all interpreters. We love our jobs and we love being in a team and we love working together and we love exchanging information and being in that environment which is so conducive to that exchange.
Mhm.
And
Mhm.
RSI puts a bit of the kibosh on that. I mean, we can all talk on Zoom, we know that,
Yeah.
but it will never replace it.
No,
However,
it's true.
it has generated so much work. I can't tell you. I
Mhm.
really can't even begin to tell you how much it has increased our work. And although there are a lot of people who would say it's not what I was trained for, it wasn't certainly what I was trained for. But
Mhm.
I think if you embrace that change and say, how can I make this work for me? How can I make it work for my customer? How can I do it in such a way that I get enjoyment from it, even though this was not originally part of the deal?
Mhm. And in fact, I've just in the last couple of days seen a couple of posts online, and in particular from Lourdes that we spoke about earlier,
Yeah.
about even using AI to try and come up with teams that you could then, you would still have to call and you would still have to do all of the organizing work, but that must also give you a bit of a backup, maybe? No?
In my case, not so much. I don't need a machine to actually put forward names. I
Mm.
I don't know. I'm sure you have got as good a memory as I have. I I really know of all the people I work with, I know their language combinations off by heart. And I've noticed that it really works well because in many cases, my wife, who helps me a lot with the recruitment, says, "Why don't we take so and so?" I say, "Oh no, she doesn't have Italian. No, sorry, she doesn't work back into French. No, she can't do this one because she only works one way." And
Oh gosh, I wish I had that kind of a memory. I remember
that
the
yeah.
person, and I remember the feeling they gave me as to whether or not they were reliable, competent, good for the team or not. I remember their A language, but since so many of the people I know are adding languages and changing, I don't even think about remembering what their language combination is anymore.
So
So,
for me, language combination is extremely important because
mm,
as I have meetings with multiple languages, often 10, 12 languages, if the relay is not good, I'm going to be out the famous creek without a paddle. And
yeah,
so are my colleagues. And I know who are also the relays that are good. I mean, having taught for many years, I know that there is a big difference between being a very good interpreter and being a very good relay interpreter. There is a
mhm,
difference.
yeah,
There are some people who are absolutely fantastic. Really, there's no dispute about the fact that they are excellent interpreters, but not easy to work from. Perhaps because they use too many expressions, or because they
ah,
don't know how to package it. I have
mhm,
many colleagues who think that they're working for an audience. I'm thinking a lot in the English booth, for example.
yeah,
In the English booth, we're working a lot for people who don't have English as a mother tongue.
yes,
So when you're working in that market, you've always got to be thinking, will this be intelligible to somebody who's got English, perhaps
mhm,
who's done English for 2 years or for 3 years or whatever? And
mhm,
the same
mhm,
thing for working from relay. If you're working from relay for somebody who packages it so well that
yeah,
all you need to do is close your eyes and just follow. You don't
yeah.
need to you don't need to do the logical reconstruction because they're pre-packaging it for
It's
it's
such a
I
pleasure.
yes, I mean I would say it's like it's a bit like the Nescafe system where you've got the dried product and all you need to do is to add water.
Right,
A
right.
good relay for me is that. I do not need to really concentrate so much because I'm being served it on a silver platter.
I still
And
remember, like, the one time, I mean, I've had decent relays throughout my career, I've also had poor relays, but the one time I had the most beautiful relay, from one language into French, and I knew the person, and I knew that whatever they gave me, I could trust, and I just went with it. And at one point, the person on the floor actually said to their side person, check the English to make sure that what I'm saying is getting through. Obviously, the interpreter didn't interpret that into English for me or into French for me, but she also knew who was taking her on relay. And so she had no problems with it either. And everything went really smoothly and it just felt really good. It's almost a high
yeah,
to get a really good relay giver
yeah.
and then
And
to
by
be
the
able,
way, one should always go and thank people who do good relays,
yes.
always.
Yeah. Oh, well,
Because
I
there is
thank
nothing more
everybody.
stimulating to know that not only
Yeah.
have you done a good job, but your colleagues, and we know that we're hypercritical of each other and of ourselves.
Yes, we
So when you
certainly
can go
are.
up to somebody and say, "That really was truly excellent, and you made my life
Yes.
fantastically easy," that
Yeah.
is really something special. How did we get onto this conversation? We were talking about how did RSI change our lives?
I
So,
think and then
in one
AI
word, immensely.
immensely. Well, to go back to a couple of the questions that we've had some comments that came in a little later. Cecilia was saying to freelancers, trust the consultant interpreters to do their job. And they're working so much, there's no need to send reminders. They are also interpreters. They know what to
Cecilia,
do.
that is you speak to my heart there. I can't tell you. I know I'm exactly the same position. I'm an interpreter and I want to have documentation. I cannot tell you how often people write to me and say, "Have we got any documents?" And I said, "If we had documents, I'd send it." Can you ask for documents? I said, how long have we been working together? Why do you ask me that? That's the first thing I do. But can't you contact them again? I said, listen, I want to keep this client and so do you. So you'd like me to pester them. And at some point, they're going to say, just get off our back, will you?
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I think we have to try our best to get whatever information we can. But at the same time, certain things are not possible. We've got to accept that.
And I think
you're so
talking to this particular comment about social and soft skills play an important role too.
Soft skills, I think soft skills are so important when you're working with your customer. You've always got to tread this fine line I was talking about right at the beginning of how do you give them constantly the feeling that you've understood their concerns, but you're not breathing down their necks all the time, that you're not there saying, well, I didn't get that speech and I didn't get this speech and you haven't done this. And have you spoken to the speaker who's going to be speaking this afternoon? So you've always got to do it in a way that elicits the right kind of response. I mean, if somebody were to say to you, get it for me, will you? Mm-hmm. Are you inclined to do it? But if you've got the right social skills and say, listen, I know that there's going to be a really difficult speaker this afternoon. We always have difficulties with them. Do you think, I know it's a bit of an imposition, but do you think you could possibly? And sometimes it works. Not always,
yeah.
But there is a bigger chance.
Yes, it's very true. Those soft skills are really important. Now back to charging the organizational fee. Katerina says there's definitely a reason to charge one. And she hopes you don't have to waive it. So
I hope not as well. I mean, I'm constantly having to find reasons to charge it. I mean, I'll just give you a small anecdote to show you what is happening in one of my markets. One of my customers said to me, you're charging an organizing fee, but you have a competitor in another market who doesn't charge us an organizing fee and who's actually charging the interpreters. So why don't you do this for us? So I said, first of all, you keep on asking me to do things on the weekend. You keep on asking me for really exotic languages. I mean, if you want Bangla, I can find you Bangla. If you want, I had to find over a weekend Kannada. I wonder how many people out there can tell me where Kannada is spoken. I had from Friday to Monday to find 2 Kannada speakers. Well, I'll give the game away. It's in Bangalore, Karnataka. Okay. And there are a multitude of Indian languages which are required. For this weekend, I've got to find Urdu. Where do you find Urdu? Do you find it in Pakistan? What about power outages in India, where that happens all the time? So you've got to find good interpreters who also have a power generator. You know, I mean, so there is a reason for an organizing fee. I mean, I'm going to keep fighting it. But just to tell you what is happening in this case, the client said to me, the person who you're in competition with makes our life easier because what that person does is to give us a single invoice and he then distributes it. And it was a clear sign to me that that's what they wanted me to do. Right. So I've started doing it, but I can tell you how much work that is. You've got to put in all these international transfers. You make the slightest mistake, the money gets caught somewhere. It is absolutely horrendous. It's increased my workload for nothing more. But you know, sometimes you have to give in if that is the way you're going to keep the customer.
In which case, this might be the solution then. Stanley or Karana, when he organizes, takes 10%, but 5% from each side. And so it lowers the amount for each side. I think if you're having to put in all those international transfers, you definitely have to do something to make up that time.
To make up the time and the cost.
Yes, exactly. And one last comment from somebody from way back with the recommendations who's wondering, do you think that the first recommendation for you, like if they were contacting you, I'm assuming, if I got that wrong, Charu, please let me know, should that be from a highly professional, somebody well-known, I'm assuming?
I mean, obviously, the better known the person, the more weight it comes from. But I mean, in my case, if Lourdes gives me a recommendation, or if somebody like Philip Smith gives me a recommendation, I don't need to think about it, you know?
Right.
I don't need to go and then check. I've got colleagues in other markets in Latin America. I mean, there are a few go-to people who I really would trust immediately.
Mm-hmm.
But and so that carries a lot of weight. And I've always said you don't need to know everything. Far from it. You just need to have a good address book and know
That's
the
true.
people you trust.
That's the truth.
But you also have to be careful, even with those professionals, because we all have our likes and dislikes, all of us.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you'll have somebody you really trust who will actually not give you a recommendation or say, don't take this person, but only because there is a little bit of bad blood between the two of them, even though that is actually very unfair on perhaps the young person or on the person for whom you've been looking for a recommendation. So you have to also be aware that this could be a bit of a double-edged sword.
Yes, it could be. It's true. Actually, one last comment now is Agnieszka was saying she got a power generator for Valentine's Day, and she's still wondering if it was for her or for the studio. So I have to admit, sometimes people give me, I've had a client give me a list of glossaries, for whatever it is that they were doing. And I looked at him like he'd just given me roses and chocolates. I think, I think he was a bit shocked by that. I was still young at the time, I have to admit, but still.
I mean, isn't it nice? I mean, it's nice being given glossaries, but I think Andy Gillies would, I'm sure, support this. There is no better glossary than the one you made yourself.
No, I have to agree with that. And all of these term extractors and everything, they really don't help me at all, because I haven't helped with my particular knowledge and being able to do it in the field. So, okay, well, I think we've come to the end of our comments and our questions. Let me just double check. We have people here from Senegal, from Burkina Faso, from Singapore, from the US, from Canada, from Europe. We're quite wide-ranging today, Peter. So,
anybody from Asia? Because for them, it's going to be dark.
yeah, I think there are definitely some people dark on both sides probably at this point for the entire thing. And definitely do come back and take a look at the comments in the LinkedIn post for an announcement for our live here, because there are a lot of conversations going on between the people as well, talking about what they do as well. So before we get to today's top tip and Peter's top tip, I just want to let you know that our next show will be on April 1st at 4 p.m., the same time. I know it's April 1st. It's not a joke. And this will be, I'll also have a guest then. And it will be April 1st will be on legal interpreting, actually. My guest will be Andrei Besiedin, who is a lawyer and a legal interpreter from Ukraine. So we'll have a chance to talk to him about what exactly legal interpreting is all about. And along with that, I'd like to let you know about the fact that the Cambridge Conference Interpretation course is now open for enrollment. And our working languages this year are English, French, German, Italian, Russian, and Spanish. Yes, I have them all. So if you're interested, please write to us as soon as you can, since the languages we actually serve will depend on what the demand is from you. So, Peter, what are you going to consider our top tip today?
Well, it's quite difficult to come up with one sentence, but as you've seen it,
I'm hinting.
Don't fight change. I was going to say, really, embrace change because it's there. And so there's no point fighting a rearguard battle and say, this is not what I've been trained to do. Things are not the way or as good as they were in the past. Things change all the time. And I think if you're happy to embrace those changes and say, listen, I'm not too stupid to learn something new, different ways of working. I found, I'm sorry if I'm going to be a bit, just give me a couple of minutes to say this, but with RSI, I've noticed that there are sort of three generations, really. My generation, the older generation, who have something to prove and say, there is something new. We're not too stupid. We will learn this. We'll get our minds around it and we will tackle it and we'll do it with enthusiasm. Then I found that there was the middle generation, your generation, who would say, this was not what I trained for. I don't want it. I want to be back in the booth with my colleagues. And then there's the younger generation who've known basically only that. So I think that there is not just going to be one market in any case, and there'll be plenty of opportunities to work in the booth with your colleagues. But for those of you who'll be working on RSI, accept the change and just make sure you make it as comfortable as possible.
I hate to do this. I'm going to ask another question because you've just given rise to another question, and you and I could probably go on for hours. I'll try and make it the last one. If we're working in these hybrid meetings where interpreters are not anywhere with other interpreters, right? We're all at home doing RSI, or we're in small hubs, but maybe there's a hub here for one language and a hub here for another language and so on. How do you get to know about us, for example? Like if it were pre-COVID, you could have talked to Willie Visser and found out about me, 20 years ago or so on. But now it's COVID, post-COVID, nobody is working physically with anybody else. How are we going to get those recommendations out? How are you going to get recommendations from people who find out about
I've got to be active myself. I mean, I do seek out because I have language requirements. There are certain languages that I'm really very keen to find. So I actually constantly asking colleagues, can you recommend somebody who has these languages and who's going to give me a very good relay? So that's the first thing. But I'm sure, we live in a very small world. And I'm sure that if people say, younger people coming out onto the market saying, how am I going to get in touch with a consultant interpreter? I'm sure that there are plenty of people out there. We all work, many of our colleagues work in big organizations like the European Parliament, or perhaps in African Unity, or in organizations such as that, where they will have been told, in this market, there are a couple of people organizing. Why don't you try and get in touch with them? So, and it's sometimes it's not an easy thing, and there is no easy solution, but you have to actually actively look around, talk to people, and as many people as possible say, what other markets would I be good for? What are my languages? Where are they looking for those languages? For instance, in my market, Portuguese is extremely important. It went from not being important to being extremely important because the Brazilians now participate in all the meetings. But then I've got to find people who can do Brazilian Portuguese, because Brazilian Portuguese and Portuguese are not the same language. They're the same language, but
there are national flavors.
So I go out really looking for people, and the people who know me will say, like Lourdes will write to me and say, why don't you give this person a call? I think he will fit your bill, and you give them a chance. I think that everybody deserves a chance. So whenever I can, that chance I have to give, as it was given me at the beginning as well. So that is me repaying a debt to the fantastic teachers I had at ETI.
Well, thank you very much. As you can see, a lot of people were inspired by what you had to say, and you've shed a lot of light on a topic that especially the youngsters don't know much about. And so thank you so much, Peter, for having.
Thank you for inviting me, Julia. And thank you to Melina for organizing a wedding.
That's true. Thank you, Melina, for your wedding and for having seated us next to each other. That worked out really well. Okay, great.
Well, okay, Julia, we will be in contact, I'm sure, and other opportunities. And
absolutely. And thank you again.
Again, thank you for inviting me.
More. Here's another very interesting. And okay, so thank you, everybody, and see you next month.